My name is Aurora Finch, and this morning I sat across from the people who gave me life, watching them try to erase mine. We were 6 feet apart in courtroom 14B. The lighting buzzed overhead, sharp and sterile, while the bailiff called the case. On the plaintiff's side, Arthur and Genevieve Finch, my parents. On the defense, me. Just me. They were suing me for fraud, claiming I'd stolen the identity of a veteran who had died overseas, claimed I forged documents to collect benefits I didn't deserve, claimed I'd built my whole life on a lie. They didn't even look at me. I didn't flinch when the lawyer laid out their so-called evidence, the absence of military photos, the missing discharge papers, the fact that no one could confirm I ever served. They painted a picture of a woman living in delusion, a daughter desperate for attention. I stayed silent, my hands folded. My uniform wasn't on my body. It was folded neatly at home in a cedar chest, but I could still feel the seam of the old combat patch under my skin, still remember the smell of Kandahar sand, the metallic bite of blood, the tremor in the medic's voice when I took over compressions. They thought silence meant guilt. Then the judge spoke. She leaned forward, voice clear but low. "I recognize the defendant," she said. "Miss Finch. I served with her." The room froze, and for the first time in years, so did my parents' certainty. I was 18 when I left that house, barely an adult, head shaved for boot camp. My mother's goodbye was no more than a cold nod at the doorframe. She didn't hug me. My father said, "Just don't embarrass us." I told myself it didn't matter, that I was building something they'd never be able to deny. But denial, I'd learned, was their specialty. Growing up in the Finch household meant earning affection like rent. My brother Prescott played the game well. Varsity everything, charming grin, business degree from Duke. I was the girl who read too much, asked too many questions, didn't smile in family photos. When I enlisted, they said it was a phase, some dramatic rebellion. They told neighbors I was taking time off to find myself. Not once did they mention I'd joined the army. Not once did they ask where I was deployed. When I came home 3 years later, scarred, limping, ribs still healing, they didn't even meet me at the gate. I arrived at their front door in Savannah with a duffel bag, a folded letter of commendation, and a bronze star tucked under my shirt. My mother looked through the peephole, opened the door halfway, and said, "Oh, you're back." That was it. She didn't ask where I'd been. My father asked if I still had my health insurance. They never asked what happened the night the convoy was hit, or why I flinch at propane igniters. They certainly didn't ask why I hadn't come home sooner. Eventually, I stopped trying. I moved into a studio near the river, volunteered at a trauma clinic that didn't ask questions, and filed my paperwork for veteran benefits through a low-cost legal aid group. Benefits I qualified for, barely, thanks to an amended file that still carried a confidential classification stamp. I didn't push back, just survived. But apparently, even that was too much. When the lawsuit arrived, certified mail on a gray January morning, I thought it was a mistake. I stared at the envelope like it had come from another world. But there it was, in my father's precise cursive. Arthur Finch versus Aurora Finch. The claim that I was impersonating a veteran, that no one by my name had served, that I was faking PTSD for handouts. I should have been furious. Instead, I laughed, quiet and bitter, like something cracking loose inside my chest. They hadn't just forgotten me, they'd rewritten me, and now they wanted the law to finish the job. The thing about silence is it's not always passive. Sometimes silence is the sharpest answer, the refusal to explain yourself to people who never cared enough to listen. That's what I told myself as I walked into the courthouse on the first day of trial, my heels echoing against the marble, hands empty, no binder, no stack of exhibits, just me in a charcoal coat, hair pulled back, breath even. I didn't need to prove I existed. but God, it still hurt to be erased. The courtroom smelled like lemon polish and recycled air. My parents sat flanked by their attorney, some coastal litigator who probably thought this would be an easy win. Arthur wore the seam suit he always wore to church. Genevieve had on her navy dress with the silver buttons, the one she'd bought for Prescott's graduation. Both of them looked immaculate, so believable, so concerned. Their lawyer wasted no time. He called me unstable, said I'd fabricated military records using stolen credentials, presented a discrepancy in Department of Defense listings. No Aurora Finch, no enlistment under her Social Security number. Showed financial records of my veteran benefits, monthly deposits, therapy subsidies, subsidized housing credits. And the audience, some reporters, some strangers, one distant cousin I hadn't seen in a decade, nodded along like it all made sense. Because it did. On paper, I didn't exist. They'd wiped me clean. What no one knew, not yet, was that my unit in Kandahar had operated under a provisional joint task force, working with medevac extraction in classified routes. For 2 years, my identity had been redacted in every report for operational security. Even when I was airlifted out after the IED blast, my medevac form listed only a code name, Delta Romeo Echo. The Army filed me as active non-disclosed, and my subsequent discharge paperwork went through a different system entirely, a smaller one that required clearance to access. But I couldn't say any of that. The minute I signed my non-disclosure agreement, I agreed to protect names, locations, outcomes, even at the cost of defending myself. So I sat there, quiet, not because I didn't have answers, but because I still honored the uniform, even if no one else in that room would. I glanced at my father during a recess. He sipped bottled water like he was parched from moral labor. Genevieve adjusted her pearl earrings, eyes scanning the crowd for reactions, measuring headlines before they were even written. They had crafted this story carefully. A daughter goes rogue, comes home broken, makes up war stories for sympathy and state checks, a perfect cocktail of shame and pity. But they hadn't counted on one thing. Someone else in that room remembered the sand, the fire, the weight of a dying body on her back, and when she spoke, the entire story would shatter. Judge Marlo Vance had been quiet through most of the trial, professional, composed, eyes steady behind thin-framed glasses, the kind of presence that doesn't announce itself but settles in like stone. Her voice, when she did speak, was measured, procedural. No one in the room seemed to know her story, no one but me. I hadn't seen her since Kandahar. Back then, she was Lieutenant Vance, bleeding out behind a smoking Humvee while I held a compression bandage to her shoulder, my own ribs cracked, hands shaking from the blast. I remembered how she gripped my forearm, eyes wide, and whispered, "Don't stop." I didn't. Even when mortar fire rattled the sky above us, I didn't stop. But I had no way of knowing if she remembered me. Not until that moment. The morning of cross-examination, the courtroom was colder than usual. My father's lawyer kept pressing on the missing documents. He gestured to the chair where I sat and said, if she truly served, there would be evidence, photos, medals, a unit willing to back her. But instead, we have silence. We have myth. I didn't answer. I just looked toward the bench, and Judge Vance blinked, just once, then lowered her gaze, like something heavy had settled on her chest. When the court recessed for lunch, I stayed behind. Everyone else filed out, buzzing with confidence, my parents chuckling softly with their attorney. I stood slowly, unsure what I'd say, but before I could move,
Judge Vance looked up, her voice barely carrying. "What was the name of your lead nurse?" she asked. I swallowed. "Imogen Shaw." "She called out coordinates while we packed your wounds." She nodded, almost imperceptibly, then turned away. It wasn't approval, not yet, but it was memory. Real, lived, shared. The afternoon session started late. When we reconvened, the room felt different, like something under the surface had begun to shift. My father leaned in, whispering to his lawyer. Genevieve had that pinched look she wore during tax season when numbers didn't align. They still thought they were winning.
Then came the question that changed everything. The attorney gestured again, loud enough for the press to hear. We asked the court, how can we trust the word of someone who can't even prove where she's been? And Judge Vance leaned forward. She didn't raise her voice, didn't bang the gavel. She simply said, "Counselor, I can tell you exactly where she's been." The room froze. "I served with her," she continued, her tone as sharp as winter air. "Kandahar, 112th Medical Evacuation Battalion. She pulled me from a burning vehicle and held my artery shut with her bare hands. I have the scar. I am the proof." There was no sound, not even a cough. Genevieve clutched her pearls. My father sat back like someone had just struck him. Their lawyer opened his mouth, but nothing came out. And me, I didn't cry, I didn't smile, I just exhaled for the first time in years. They adjourned early that day. No official statement, no dismissal of the case, just a stunned silence as people collected their belongings and shuffled out like they'd just witnessed something they weren't supposed to. My father stood up slowly, stiff in the shoulders. Genevieve didn't speak. Her face had gone pale, like makeup layered over ice. I stayed seated until they were gone. I didn't want to walk behind them. Not anymore. Outside, the air was thick with humidity and tension. Reporters swarmed near the steps, but I kept my head down. Judge Vance's words still echoed behind my ribs. I am the proof. 4 words stronger than every accusation they'd built. The next day, the courtroom was packed. Not just family now. Veterans had shown up. Men in worn caps, women with clipped hair and steady eyes. Some I knew, some I didn't. But they sat behind me in quiet solidarity, hands folded, as if to say, "We see you now." I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. The court clerk read into the record the declassification order, my personnel files, combat record, commendations, all sealed due to a provisional joint task force, had been cleared for release under emergency exception, signed by a Pentagon liaison the night before. Everything my parents said I had faked was now admissible. Medals, deployment logs, a handwritten field report from Kandahar with my name, blood type, and the initials MZ, Major Zimmer, my commanding officer. Their lawyer objected, said this was last-minute theatrics, said it was unfair. Judge Vance raised one brow. So was bleeding out in a war zone while she held my artery. He sat down. I didn't speak during any of it. Not when the judge dismissed the lawsuit with prejudice, not when the courtroom erupted in low murmurs and flickering glances, not even when a young woman in uniform stepped forward and saluted as I left the bench. I just nodded and kept walking. That night, I returned to my small apartment, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window. I had thought it would feel like victory. It didn't. It felt like something closer to grief, not for what they did, but for how easily they had done it, for how ready the world was to believe a woman like me was lying, for how small they made my truth seem when no one else stood beside it. They hadn't just tried to erase my service, they had tried to erase me, and if it hadn't been for one woman, one memory stitched into scar tissue, I might have let them. I set the glass down and walked to the cedar chest in the corner. I opened it slowly, my uniform pressed, my old field gloves, a coin from Lieutenant Vance back when I saved her life, and she said, "Don't let them make you small." I hadn't, not today.
The news didn't run my name. Not really. There were a few mentions buried deep in local outlets. Georgia veteran cleared a fraud after high-profile family dispute. A single still photo of me exiting the courthouse, half-shadowed, head down. No headline said, "Daughter falsely accused by her own parents." No story detailed how the judge stopped everything with 6 words. And I preferred it that way. I didn't need the world to cheer. I just wanted it to stop whispering. The day after the case was dismissed, I unplugged my landline. I deleted my social media. Not that I'd posted in years. Still, the messages came. Voicemail transcripts from advocacy groups, requests for interviews, a nonprofit offering to fund a documentary on military truth and family betrayal. I didn't answer. Let the voicemail pile up like leaves I had no intention of raking. This wasn't vindication. This was survival.
My parents never called, not to explain, not to apologize, but I did receive something 2 weeks later. A letter in thick, expensive stationery. Arthur's handwriting, formal and heavy. No greeting, just 4 sentences about regretful confusion and how familial dynamics are often complex. He signed it Dr. Arthur E. Finch, as if we'd only ever been colleagues in some distant academic paper. I burned it without reading the last line. Truth be told, I didn't hate them. Not even then. Hate is active, it feeds on friction, but what I felt toward my parents was colder, like fog on glass. I had wanted to be seen once, needed it, begged for it in my younger years through medals, letters, folded flags, and silence. But somewhere in that courtroom, under the weight of Judge Vance's voice and the flicker of recognition in a stranger's eyes, I stopped asking. I moved 3 months later. A small house in western North Carolina, tucked at the edge of Pisgah Forest. Just me, the trees, and the sound of running water beyond the back porch. I found work as a peer counselor at a regional veterans clinic. No titles on my door, no nameplate, just Aurora, the way I preferred it. Most of the people who came through didn't ask about my story, and I didn't offer it. They didn't need to know what happened in Kandahar. They just needed someone who understood why the scent of diesel made them twitch, or why silence was sometimes the loudest sound in a room. Some days I'd catch myself watching the door, as if expecting them, my father, Genevieve, even Prescott, but they never came. I heard through someone at the clinic that my brother took a job in Florida, some lobbying firm. My mother still hosted charity events. I became a footnote in their social script, the daughter who drifted. The one we try to love from a distance. That was fine. Distances can be safe. One quiet Friday, just before closing, a man walked into the clinic. Mid-50s, Marine veteran by the build and the way he scanned the exits before sitting. A scar across his neck like a thick rope had once tried to end him. He didn't say his name. He sat across from me, calloused hands folded, eyes steady. "You the one from the trial?" he asked after a moment. I nodded, slow. He didn't ask what happened, didn't demand receipts, just leaned back and said, "You stayed quiet. You didn't beg." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said, I wasn't going to let them tell my story for me. He tapped the armrest, thoughtful. "That's the kind of strength people don't know how to praise," he murmured, "but the right people notice." Then he stood and left, like he'd only come to confirm something real still existed in the world. Later that evening, I returned home and checked the mailbox. No name on the envelope, just my address written by hand. Inside, a photograph, old and grainy, me kneeling beside a smoking Humvee, dirt across my face, blood-soaked gauze pressed to a wound just off frame, my eyes locked, jaw set. In the corner, a single word, barely legible, Vance. She'd kept it all these years, not for court, not for headlines, maybe as proof, maybe as a reminder. I framed the photo and placed it on the shelf above the fireplace, not beside medals, not near the folded flag, just above a piece of wood I'd carved months earlier. The truth doesn't need to shout. Some kinds of justice don't come with applause. They arrive in silence, in the way your breath steadies again, in the way your name no longer burns in your own mouth,
in the way you can look at your reflection and finally stop apologizing for surviving. I no longer measure time by deployments or court dates, not by anniversaries, not by letters that never arrived. These days I count it differently, by how long the sunlight stays on the porch in the late spring, or by the way the wind shifts just before a thunderstorm rolls in. Time feels slower here, but it's the kind of slow that lets you breathe again. My name is Aurora Finch, and I am no longer missing.
After the case was dismissed, the Department of Defense reprocessed my file. A manila envelope arrived by certified mail one morning, tucked beneath the paw of my one-eyed rescue dog, who likes to guard the porch like it's a military post. Inside the envelope was a simple certificate: honorably discharged, enlistment 2008, division 112th Medical Evacuation, awards, Bronze Star, Army Commendation with V device, 3 letters of field recognition. It looked so unremarkable, so bureaucratic, but I ran my fingers over my name like it was a prayer. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. My parents never called. I don't know if they ever read the final ruling, if they understood the weight of what they had done. Maybe they still believe I made it all up. Maybe that's easier for them than facing the truth that their daughter became someone they never took the time to know. Either way, I no longer carry their silence like a wound. It's just gone. Sometimes closure isn't an apology. It's just an absence that no longer hurts. The small house I moved into sits along a ridge in western North Carolina. 2 bedrooms, 1 worn fireplace, a backyard with just enough room for tomatoes and the ghosts I no longer have to outrun. I built a bench at the back of the property facing the tree line. From there you can see stars most nights, clear, unapologetic, exactly as they are. At the clinic where I work, people come and go. Some stay quiet for weeks before saying a word. Others open up fast, like the silence might eat them alive if they don't. I let them choose the pace. I don't talk about my trial unless someone asks, and even then I don't offer details. I just say, the truth survived. That's what matters. And it is. One evening after a group session, a young vet lingered behind. Her name was Liv, Army Signals Intelligence. Small voice, steady eyes. She glanced toward the door, then looked at me. "My parents still think I made it up," she said. "The night attack, the fire, all of it." I nodded, not as sympathy but recognition. "They won't come around," she added. "Maybe they don't need to," I replied. She didn't cry, she just exhaled, and in that breath was something I knew well, the release that comes when someone finally stops asking for permission to be real. That night, I sat out on the bench behind my house. The stars came early. Crickets hummed their low, constant song. I held the photo in my hand, the one Vance had sent me. Kandahar. My face streaked with soot, hands red, jaw tight, a sliver of light across my shoulder like a blade. That woman was still inside me. She had survived more than gunfire. She had survived being forgotten. And now she was building a life where she didn't need to be seen to exist. She just needed to stay true.